All right, so the question is, can we really understand aging? Because one of the things that's consistently true when you go to conferences like this is that people say, well, calorie restriction works. You know, they've done experiments and it seems to work quite effectively. It's one of the few cases that you can point to where it truly extends lifespan. And whenever they announce these at conferences, I'd stand up and say, but the animals still die. Now, this, of course, makes the researchers a little bit unhappy, but I thought the problems they were dealing with weren't really addressing what causes aging. Because if you look across almost all species, they all end up aging, they all end up mostly dying of the same things. So that's what we're going to focus on. So can we really understand what's going on? And can we make the understanding go faster? Can we find solutions that are like, which solutions are off the shelf and which solutions are we going to have to invent? Because inventing is hard, stealing or borrowing is easy, as I'll get to. And that's why we want to do it, because it costs a lot. So, evolution. Theodore Dobzhansky said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And I view, as a programmer for 15 years, the genome as a computer program. It's a set of instructions. Those instructions are called genes, and they are organized as functions that are pathways, such as the one on the wall back here, and those pathways do particular things. Now, in evolution, there are two types of selection. You've got R selection, and Michael alluded to this yesterday. R selection, which is rapid selection. That's because you're usually at the bottom of the food chain, everything is eating you, and you've got to reproduce fast and reproduce a lot to keep the species alive. K selection, on the other hand, is where you're near the carrying capacity. Steve Ostad has a book out that explains these very well, and prove that if you have an isolated species, like on an island where resources are limited, you will move from R selection to K selection, naturally in the process of evolution. Michael kind of forces it with his flies because he's only taking the children of the eldest flies and allowing them to reproduce and create the new genome. So now if you look at evolution, you can look at these extinctions on the left-hand column here. And these extinctions wiped out a significant fraction of the species at that time. Kind of like resetting the clock of evolution, or creating niches or opportunities for new species to evolve. So on the right are the dates, approximately, of the evolution of those types. Fish came first, then amphibians, then reptiles, then mammals. Everyone knows this is basic biology. Now, interestingly enough, before 500 million years ago, there was probably a fair amount of evolution for about 1.5 billion years. But we don't have good records for that, except for maybe the first clams, because they didn't leave any shells, any backbones or any ribs or anything else that we can look at and say, oh yeah, that's how the thing evolved. So now you have to say, okay, well, you've got these species kind of sitting around, and some of them are R selected, and some of them may be K selected. But how do you go from R to K? How do you become a long-lived species? Well, nature has come up with a number of things. Shells, for example. Everyone knows the story of tortoises living 200 years. And so tortoises are an example of a long-lived species that said, hey, if I create a shell, I can survive the predators in the area, and therefore I can go in the K selection direction and get longevity. Lobsters are another example. They don't really know how long lobsters might live because we've harvested all of the really old ones, at least off the Maine coast. And so, but they think they may live a couple of hundred years. So that's one possibility. Birds also have very long lifespans. Why? Because it sees a predator coming and it goes in the other direction. So you can flee from your hazards. And then camouflage may be a third. Now, and in addition, size is a good thing, because if you're a lot bigger than the predator will think twice about coming to eat you. Intelligence is a good example. If you think about whales that migrate from one end of the earth to the other, or if you think about size, if you think about intelligence in terms of an elephant trekking across Africa to go from where the water is in one season to where the water is in another season. And then you think about what happens if you combine size and intelligence. Well, that's two, and even throw in tusks for a little bit of defenses. Now you've got three. So this is why certain species can put these together and evolve very long lifespans. And so if you look through the species that are available, and João Pedro Domingues Reis has a database that anyone can access called the ANAGE database, and you can plug in the species name and it will spit out what the current maximum longevity appears to be for that species. Well, for primates, it's 122 years, as we know. And chimpanzee and gorilla are, not as long-lived, but they're up in the 60s probably. Elephants, it's 70 or 80 years. Bats, maybe 30 or 40 for a couple of species. Rodents, normally you think of as, excuse me, short-lived animals, but mole rats, apparently, and squirrels have relatively long lifespans. So if you're able to avoid hazards, such as jumping from tree to tree, or you live underground in a social colony, such as the mole rats do, then you may reduce your hazard function and be able to evolve longevity. Birds, for example, the parrots live 80 years, albatross lives something like 60, crocodiles live 60 or so, tortoises can live up to 200. Amphibians, the Japanese salamander, I was surprised at this, the Japanese salamander can live about 80 years. For an amphibian, you think you've got no defenses, how the heck? And the reason, because they live in very high mountain streams where there are no predators. So, and then fish, those are the fish. Sturgeon can live over 100 years. Mollusks, the quahog can live 400 years. Lobsters, horseshoe crab. Now, bees and ants, interestingly enough, the queen can live a phenomenally long time. The workers, they're gone in a year or less, while the queens of those species can live up to a decade or so. And then echinoderm, sea urchins, maximum current is thought to be 200 years. So longevity can evolve. So we're going to discuss cells and how cells work, and so, the typical thing you've got in the cell is, whoops, there we go, is you've got the mitochondria generating the energy. You've got the nucleus that's keeping the program, or most of the program. As Aubrey said yesterday, it's got part of the program is in the mitochondria, but it's a very small fraction. The endoplasmic reticulum is here, and it's responsible for creating the proteins that go into get put on the surface of the cell, and then the Golgi body helps the ribosome exporting stuff, and then the proteasome and the lysosome are responsible for breaking stuff down. The mitochondria, the electron transport chain, produces free radicals. Most of these are neutralized by, sorry about that. Most of these are neutralized by these enzymes or these antioxidants. The alternate sources include gamma rays, X-rays, endoradiation, peroxisomes, and xenobiotic toxin metabolism. All right, DNA, you can damage the base, you can damage the bonding, or you can damage the backbone. And the problem, the solution to this are you've got direct repair by some enzymes, base excision repair, you remove the one that's been damaged and replace it, nucleotide excision repair, you remove a whole chunk, mismatch repair, if you're scanning along and you find something that doesn't match what's on the other side, you replace it. And this is the one we're going to talk about here, is double-strand break repair.